I sent the text that ended my relationship at 11:47 on a Thursday night. At 11:49, a man I had never met told me I was braver than I felt. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his face. And I certainly didn't know the stranger reading my heartbreak was Maddox Callahan, a man whose name made powerful people lower their voices, or that everything I believed about my breakup was a lie sitting on top of something much worse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with a lie I was never supposed to see. My name is Tessa Whitmore. I'm 34, and I investigate consumer complaints for a living. People write to my office when a company cheats them, and my job is to find the pattern hiding under the paperwork. I'm good at it. I notice what doesn't fit. The irony is that for 2 years I failed to notice what didn't fit in my own home. That Thursday, I was at the Hotel Concordian. Julian, my boyfriend, was working the sponsor's side of a glossy charity gala, and I'd come straight from the office to surprise him. I remember the chandeliers, the string quartet, the smell of lilies. I remember scanning the crowd for his sandy hair, half fond and half habitual. I found him on the mezzanine. He wasn't alone. A woman with copper hair stood close to him, and he was speaking to her the way he used to speak to me, head tilted, hand at the small of her back. Then he kissed her. Not a friendly kiss, a familiar one, the kind that has a history. People always ask what I did. Next, as if heartbreak comes with a script, what I did was nothing. I stood behind a marble column and listened. Because that is my curse. I'm a listener by trade. I heard him laugh and say, "Tessa, she has no idea. She never checks anything that matters." And the woman laughed, too. I walked out into the cold and didn't cry. That scared me more than the kiss. 2 years, and what I felt on that sidewalk wasn't grief. It was humiliation, pure and clarifying, like a light switched on in a room I'd been sitting in the dark. Back home, I did something I'd never done. I didn't call him. I didn't give him the chance to talk me down. I wrote the truth, whole ugly truth, to the number I'd saved 3 months earlier when he'd changed phones and scrawled the new digits on the back of a business card in his rushed handwriting. The message said, "Don't call me. Don't come by. I saw you tonight at the Concordian. 2 years. And you called me the woman who never checks anything. You were right about one thing. I never checked you. That's over now. Leave the spare key under the mat. We are done." I pressed send before I could soften a single word. I made tea. I was on my second sip when my phone lit up, and I braced for Julian, slippery with charm. It wasn't Julian. The reply said, "If you were brave enough to send that message, you're probably brave enough to leave him." I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. Wrong number. I had poured the most private moment of my adult life into a stranger's phone. My face burned so hot I had to set the phone on the counter like it was something alive. I typed an apology, deleted it, typed another. And before I could send either, the phone lit up a second time. One question. 5 words. What made you stay this long? I can't explain what happened to me reading that. A stranger had asked. In 5 words, the question none of my friends had asked, the question I'd refused to ask myself. Not what did he do? Not are you, okay? What made you stay? Whoever this was understood that the betrayal wasn't the interesting part. The staying was. And here's the question that would not leave me alone. The question this whole story is really about. Who answers a stranger's breakup text before midnight with a question like that? And why did it feel like he already knew the answer? I sat on my kitchen floor back against the cabinets and typed the truth to a wrong number. Because I was afraid, I wrote, because being alone felt like failure, and staying felt like a job I could be good at. I hit send before pride could stop me. The reply came in under a minute. That isn't a flaw, it said. That's a diagnosis. The two are not the same. I laughed. Actually laughed. Alone on my kitchen floor, an hour after watching my relationship end. He didn't flatter me. He didn't say poor. You. He spoke like a man reading a case file. And somehow that was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in months. We texted until 2 a.m. I never asked his name. He never offered it. I only knew that a stranger had asked what made me stay, and that by 2 a.m. I had told him things I had never told anyone. Saturday, I had the locks changed. Julian's key came back under the mat. And then his text began. First wounded, then charming. As if I were a deal he could still close. The only thing I answered was a photo of the lease addendum removing his name. He went quiet after that. That surprised me too. I thought men like Julian never stopped. Sunday night, the stranger proposed the rules. He proposed them, not me. No names, he wrote. No photographs. No questions about work. No meeting. You are a person I know nothing about, and I would like to keep one of those. I asked why that mattered. Because everyone in my life knows who I am before I walk into the room, he wrote, and they adjust themselves accordingly. You cannot. It's the only conversation I have that isn't a negotiation. I made my own rules. He didn't get to fix me. And if either of us ever said stop, it stopped. He agreed to all of it, then added one thing I didn't understand until much later. I will never lie to you. I may not tell you everything, but what I tell you will be true. I remember thinking that was a strange, lawyerly promise. I decided he was probably married, so I asked him once, directly. No wife, he wrote back. No one waiting up. You're allowed to believe me or not. I believed him. That was the first mistake, or the first miracle. I've had a year to decide which. For 3 weeks, a stranger became the safest hour of my day. He asked once what I did. I reminded him of his own rule, and he wrote, then tell me why you're good at it. That isn't the same question. So I told him about a retired school teacher from my first year. She came in with a $40 overcharge on a medical bill, one line item, and every other investigator passed because $40 doesn't justify the hours. I took it because she kept apologizing for wasting our time. I pulled the provider's billing history and found the same $40 error on 11,000 statements. $40 at a time. Nearly $500,000 skimmed from people too tired to check. It taught me the lesson my career is built on. Nobody steals $500,000 at once. They steal $40 at a time from people they believe will never check. He was quiet after that one. Then he wrote, that's the most useful thing anyone has told me this year. And I sat in my kitchen feeling strangely proud, like I'd passed an exam I hadn't studied for. He never told me what he did, but he told me what it was like to be him, in pieces, the way you describe a house by its rooms instead of its address. He made decisions before breakfast that other people spent years avoiding. He was related to people who smiled at him and measured his office curtains in the same glance. Everyone who talks to me wants something, he wrote once. It's a kind of deafness. You stop hearing the person under the request, and only once. Most people are nervous when they talk to me. You aren't. You could be a dentist, I wrote back. For all I know, you're a very tense dentist. I could be, he answered. Hold on to that. There were other things I noticed and filed away, the way you file away weather. Evenings he vanished and reappeared at 1 in the morning with a dry apology and no details. The way he wrote about family obligation, like a trade he was born into and never asked for. I know who he was now. So let me show you his side of the glass, because it matters. Maddox Callahan was 51, and the word people used about him, the careful word was connected. He owned things openly. Logistics, storage, import, and he was owed things quietly. And the quiet part was older than the open part. If you're picturing a man shouting into a phone in a movie, stop. Maddox never shouted. He'd learned young that the quietest man in the room is the one everyone watches. The night my text arrived, 11 of his relatives had been finishing dinner before a vote he had called himself. The vote was about his cousin Graham, polished 43, an executive in the family's legitimate companies, because there were irregularities in a logistics subsidiary that kept pointing toward Graham's desk without ever landing on it. Maddox had spent 6 months on the question. That night, the family voted to keep Graham in his seat because the proof was thin and Graham's mother was at the table. Maddox accepted the vote with a nod, went back to his study, and his phone lit up with the angriest, most honest paragraph he'd read in years, from a number he didn't know. His sister Beatrice noticed the change in him before anyone. Beatrice was 58, keeper of the family's memory, the woman who remembered every favor ever owed and every outsider who ever got close. At Sunday dinner, she set down her glass and said, "You've been smiling at your phone. I'll ask once. Who is she?" "A wrong number," Maddox said. "Wrong numbers get deleted. This one didn't." He said it mildly and did not elaborate. And that was the moment Beatrice began keeping a file on me in her head, though I wouldn't learn her name for another month. Then came the Friday that changed the direction of everything, though neither of us knew it. Julian had sent roses to my office that afternoon, a public gesture built to be witnessed, and I was angry all over again. I wrote to the stranger. He used to complain that my world drowned in signatures, too many approvals, too much paper. He always said paper was how cowards slowed down ambitious people. The reply took 11 minutes. His replies never took 11 minutes. That's an interesting thing for him to say. The stranger finally wrote, "The people who complain about signatures are usually the ones planning to sign something they shouldn't." I thought it was a clever line. I didn't know what it cost him to send it. Because here is what had been on Maddox Callahan's desk that same morning. A report from his own auditors. Meridian Distribution, one of his family's clean, public-facing companies, had a client problem. A retail chain threatening a lawsuit over a contaminated shipment. The liability should have moved down a chain of paper to a small supplier called Kepler Holdings. Except the paper was wrong. The delegation letters authorizing Kepler's compliance filings carried signatures his auditors now believed were forged, and the consultant who had shepherded Kepler's paperwork through 3 agencies was a man named Julian Cross. Maddox had been staring at that name for 4 days, and then a woman he knew only as a wrong number mentioned that her ex complained about too. Many signatures. He told me later he sat very still for a long time. It was like watching 2 trains on parallel tracks and realizing from a height that they share a junction. The odds of coincidence, he said, were the kind of odds he'd built a life on refusing to accept. He could have told me that night. One sentence. "I know who Julian is, and he's a problem." It's what I spent weeks being angry that he hadn't done. Instead, he asked himself a colder question, and I'll be honest because he was honest with me. He asked whether I was part of it. He'd been lied to professionally for 30 years. A woman appears from nowhere. No name, no face. And her ex is the signature on a forgery touching his company. In his world, that isn't a coincidence. It's an approach. So he kept his name, kept his knowledge, kept talking, and told himself he was watching. "And were you watching?" I asked him later, after everything. "For about 10 days, he said. Then I was just a man who looked forward to 6 p.m. and didn't want to lose it." Which was worse? A watcher has rules. I had stopped using mine. 3 weeks after the gala, I stopped waiting for someone to hand me the truth and went looking for it, the way I was trained. Julian still had a key to my building's storage room. Nobody had thought to ask for it back. In his last months, he'd kept boxes, down there instead of in the apartment. Old tax files, he'd said. I had never once opened them, because I was the woman who never checked anything. His words. Fine. Now I checked. It wasn't tax files. It was 8 archive boxes, meticulously labeled in his handwriting, and inside them formation documents for 4 shell companies in 2 states. And this is the part that made my hands go cold. Drafts of interagency letters in my handwriting. Not copies of my real letters. My handwriting practiced on letters I had never written, delegating signature authority over consumer case files to people I had never met. He had been tracing my hand, probably for months, probably at our own kitchen table while I made dinner. And clipped to the 4th folder, a contract I wasn't meant to see. Kepler Holdings, the authorized signatory on the compliance. Side was a forged delegation from my office. The consultant who filed it was Julian Cross, and the client on the other end was a name that meant nothing to me yet. Meridian Distribution. I sat on that concrete floor and did what I had trained 100 frightened people to do, stopped feeling and started cataloging. Photographs, dates, a written timeline while the memory was fresh. Then, because I had nowhere else to put my fear, I did the one thing I wasn't supposed to do. I told Nora Bell. ran the downtown mediation office where I'd worked my first 5 years. And at 56, she was my mentor, my reference, and twice my alibi for working through holidays. She kept a drawer of dried lavender for clients who came in shaking, and she taught me that investigation is a craft of patience. Paper doesn't lie, she used to say, but it waits for someone willing to read slowly. I spread the photographs on her desk. She read for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You're not the first person he's done this to. You're the first who found the boxes." She looked up. My first year, I found something like this. Smaller and I got scared and let it go, and a family lost their house over it. I have never let anything go since. So hear me. You will document everything. Keep your hands clean, and you will not do this alone out of pride. Tell me what you need. That night, I broke the work rule with the stranger. No names, but I wrote, "I need to tell someone who isn't my mentor. I found something today in boxes my ex left behind. Letters in my handwriting that I never wrote. Signature, authority I never gave. Companies I've never heard of. I think he's been using my office's name as a stamp on things." This time the reply took 23 minutes. I counted. When it came, it was careful in a way his messages never were. "Check the delegation letters against the filing dates," he wrote. "Forged authority almost always arrives after the filing it pretends to authorize. And check the notary stamps. Notaries rotate. The same stamp on documents notarized months apart in different cities is a signature of its own." I read that 3 times. Then I typed, slowly, "How do you know that? That's not a guess. That's procedure. Nobody outside a courtroom or a very specific kind of office knows to check notary rotation." A long pause. "I've read a lot of contracts," he wrote, "and I've been on the wrong side of clever paperwork. Trust the documents, not your feelings about them. Feelings tell you what you want. Paper tells you what happened." It was a good answer, almost good enough. But I lay awake that night, and for the first time a cold thread of doubt worked into the warmest part of my day, because that message hadn't read like a stranger being supportive. It read like a man standing over a file, telling me which page to turn. I should have pulled back then. I didn't. I did what he said. And the terrible thing, the thing that kept me up for a week, was that he was right about all of it. The delegation letters bore dates after the filings they claimed to authorize. The same notary stamp appeared on documents supposedly signed in 2 cities 4 months apart. And once I had Kepler's name, I followed the money the way Nora taught me, slowly, through filings anyone could request. Kepler answered to a holding company. The holding company leased warehouse space from a second company. And that second company shared a registered agent and 3 directors with Meridian Distribution. The name meant nothing to me for 2 more days. Then a trade journal profiled Meridian as the quiet success of the Callahan family's legitimate portfolio and printed a photograph. That photograph is where this story stops being a mystery about paperwork and becomes something much more personal. But not yet. First, the Tuesday I met a stranger at a hotel and nearly said too much. Bye. Then the thread ran through 6 companies, all touched by Julian's consulting, all brushing at one remove or 2 against the same logistics group. We needed one thing we didn't have, Meridian's internal receiving records, which would show whether the company knew its supplier's paper was false or was itself a victim. There was a hospitality reception at the Concordian, the same hotel, because the universe has a sense of humor I have never fully appreciated, and Meridian's operations people would attend. Nora called in a favor and got me a guest badge. The plan was modest. Listen, learn names, maybe get a card. The ballroom was all brass and bad wine. I was near the bar pretending to read a schedule of panels when I became aware of a man beside me, tall, silver at the temples, early 50s, a dark suit that didn't need to announce what it cost. He wasn't working the room. The room was working around him. I noticed that first, the way conversations bent toward him, the way people checked his face before laughing at their own jokes. He ordered a seltzer. Then, without looking at me, "You've read that schedule 4 times. Either it's fascinating, or you're deciding whether the man by the podium is worth your question." I should have walked away. Instead, because I have never once done the sensible thing in this story, I said, he isn't. His boss is. But his boss didn't come. His boss never comes. The man said, he sends people to rooms like this and reads about them afterward. He turned then and looked at me properly, and there was something in his face I recognized before I could name it. The patience of a listener. You're not in hospitality, he said. Neither are you. No, he agreed. I'm in consequences. It should have sounded absurd. It didn't. We talked perhaps 10 minutes about nothing that mattered. The terrible wine. Whether anyone chooses this work or just inherits other people's problems. He was dryly funny. He never asked my name. I never asked his. When he left, he said, whatever question you came here with, ask it in writing. People lie with their faces. They tell the truth on paper, and then he was gone, and 3 conversations resumed in his wake like water closing over a stone. I stood there with my heart beating strangely hard, thinking, who are you? I didn't know. That's the part I still can't quite believe. I didn't know I'd just spoken to the man I texted every night. I didn't know the question I'd been living with for a month, who answers a stranger's heartbreak at midnight, had just been standing beside me ordering a seltzer. But you've known for a while. And that is a particular ache. Watching 2 people stand 3 feet apart, each holding half of a secret the other is carrying, each walking home to text a stranger about the interesting person they almost met. That night I wrote to the stranger about it. I told him I'd met a man who said people tell the truth on paper. You'd have liked him. He reminded me of you. Same habit of saying something that sounds like an aphorism and turning out to be advice. This time the reply took 40 minutes. He sounds tedious. The stranger finally wrote, did you get what you went for? No. But I know where to look next. Then it was a good evening. And then, a moment later, something he'd never sent before. Be careful who you let stand next to you at bars. I read that line with the cold thread pulling tight in my chest, because I hadn't told him where the reception was. I'd said a professional event, a ballroom. I had never once said the word hotel or bar. How did he know I'd been standing at a bar? 2 days later, the trade journal's photograph answered a question I hadn't asked and broke my heart in a way Julian never managed. The article covered Meridian's expansion. The photograph showed the family principals at a groundbreaking, and there at the center, silver at the temples, the patience of a listener, was the man from the hotel, Maddox Callahan. The caption called him the family's principal and noted in careful trade journal language that the Callahan name carried interests well beyond logistics, the kind of sentence that says everything by saying nothing. I don't know how long I sat with that photograph, long enough to understand the shape of the thing before I could bear its details. Maddox Callahan owned Meridian. Julian's forgeries touched Meridian, and the stranger who had told me, with surgical precision which documents to check and in what order, had spoken like a man standing over a file. It was Nora who found the second photograph. A society column, a charity dinner Callahan at a table, and beside his plate, face up his phone, its lock screen caught by a long lens and enlarged by an editor who probably thought nothing of it. The lock screen was a message thread. You couldn't read the words, but you could read the timestamp on the last one. And I knew that timestamp because I had sent it from my kitchen floor. And I knew the pale green of my own bubbles. The man at the bar. The man at midnight. The man whose company my ex had been robbing with my forged name. One man. It had always been one man. Here is what I need you to understand, because it's the hinge of everything after. I was not afraid of him. The betrayal was not that he was dangerous or connected or whatever word the journals used instead of the real one. The betrayal was that he had known for weeks. He'd known Julian's mess was sitting on his own desk. He'd listened to me grieve. A breakup that was also, secretly, his business problem. He guided my investigation of his own case like a man moving, my hand across a page. Every rule, no names, no work, no meeting, had protected exactly one person, him. I'd spent a month being the only honest conversation in his life, and the whole time it had an agenda I couldn't see. I trusted him, I thought, staring at his photograph. And the whole time, he was reading me like a file. I typed and deleted a dozen messages that night. What I sent was, "I know who you are. Don't text me again." His reply came in under a minute. I could feel the discipline it took to keep it short. Then I'll say it once. Everything I told you was true. What I didn't tell you is mine to answer for, and I will answer when you're ready to ask. I won't contact you first. I didn't answer. I turned, the phone face down, and sat in my dark kitchen, in the same spot on the floor where I'd once told a stranger the truth, and I finally cried, the way I hadn't cried for Julian, because Julian had only taken 2 years. This man had taken the one safe place I had built from the wreckage. What I couldn't see was what the silence did. On the other side of the city, Maddox Callahan had spent 30 years being flattered, managed, feared, and lied to, and he'd built a life that could survive all of it. What it could not survive, he discovered that week, was the absence of a 6 p.m. message from a woman who had never wanted anything from him. "I have been outvoted, outbid, and twice nearly buried," he told me later. None of it felt like that week. I kept picking up the phone to tell you things, and there was no one to tell. Beatrice saw the silence too and misread it completely. At Sunday dinner, she said, "Good, it's finished." And Maddox set down his glass and said, quietly in a tone that stilled the table, "Nothing about her is finished. Be careful, sister," which told Beatrice exactly how much trouble I was. I'll be honest about what came next, because it would be easy to say I marched out of that kitchen transformed. I didn't. I grieved about a week. Then Nora arrived one Saturday with a file box, and a thermos sat at my table and said, "You can be angry and effective. The two are not exclusive. So, are you going to let Julian Cross retire quietly on money he stole with your signature, or are you going to finish what you started in that storage unit?" That was the question that got me off the floor. Not forgiveness, not him, the work. Here is what we'd built by then, Nora and I, over 6 weeks of evenings and public filings. Julian's consulting firm was the hub. Around it 4 shells, and around them a pattern so consistent it was almost lazy. Meridian, or a company tied to it, would face a liability, a contaminated shipment, a safety complaint, an insurance exposure. And in each case, the liability slid down a chain of paper and landed on one of Julian's shells, a company with no assets, no employees, and a registered agent in a strip mall, which then quietly folded. The risk didn't disappear. It was parked off the books, where no auditor and no court would send the bill home. The forged delegations from my office were the grease. A consumer rights office carries institutional trust. Our letterhead says somebody checked. Julian had stamped that trust onto paper authorizing the shells to absorb the liabilities. Every fraudulent letter drafted in a tracing of my handwriting. He'd turned my professional name into a signature of approval on poison, which explained the detail that had puzzled me from the start. Why keep the boxes at all? A careful man burns that paper, but Julian didn't keep them as archives. He kept them as insurance, proof he hadn't acted alone. Letters bearing other people's signatures, drafts annotated in a hand that wasn't his and wasn't mine. Julian Cross, charming to the end, had built himself a get-out-of-jail file. The other hand on those drafts became the question that mattered. Someone inside Meridian's world had to know which shipments were about to become liabilities. Someone fed Julian the timing. Julian was not an architect. He was a subcontractor. I didn't know yet whose hand it was. But Maddox's family was about to hand me the answer by making the worst mistake guilty people make. They came after me. I never contacted Maddox. I want that on the record because of everything his family later claimed. For 9 weeks, I sent nothing. What broke? The silence was not me reaching for him. It was his sister reaching for me. The Concordian again, because some stories only have one set. Meridian's charitable foundation was holding a fundraising luncheon, and Nora had gotten us invited legitimately. Her office had mediated a settlement the foundation funded. We were there to listen. I was 2 steps inside when a woman in an ivory suit crossed the lobby with the unhurried certainty of someone who has never been stopped by a locked door. "Tessa Whitmore," she said. Not a question. "Beatrice Callahan, walk with me." She steered me, one hand light at my elbow, to a corridor above the ballroom, and looked at me the way archivists look at documents for signs of forgery. "I'll save us both an hour," she said. "I know about the text messages. I know my brother spent 2 months talking to a woman with no name. And I know that woman turns out to be an investigator whose office has been sniffing around companies connected to our family. So tell me, Miss Whitmore, how long did you plan it? Discovering my brother's identity first, or choosing him first and inventing the excuse after?" The wrong number. Very touching. It's the kind of detail a clever person invents because no one can disprove a coincidence. I have been shouted at by guilty executives and wept on by defrauded widows, and I'll tell you, nothing sharpens the mind like being calmly accused by a woman who has decided your life is a scheme. And here is what I understood in that corridor that Beatrice didn't expect. She wasn't protecting her brother from me, she was protecting something else, and the accusation was a probe. Guilty people defend themselves with emotion, so I didn't. "You're right that no one can disprove a coincidence," I said, "so I won't try. Your brother's auditors flagged forged delegation letters in a Meridian supplier's file about 3 months ago. The consultant who filed them was Julian Cross. The handwriting on the forged letters is a tracing of mine, and I found the practice drafts in my own storage unit, with photographs originals and a dated timeline. I didn't learn your brother's identity until a trade journal printed his picture 9 weeks after the first text. I've documented the sequence, because documenting sequences is my job. I let her sit with that. You can keep deciding I'm an opportunist, but you'll have to decide it against evidence, and I don't think you enjoy that." For the first time, something moved behind Beatrice Callahan's composure, not warmth. The recalibration of a woman who has spent 50 years sorting people into threat and not threat, hearing a piece click into the wrong column. She said, very evenly, "Graham handles the supplier relationships." It wasn't friendly, but it was the first true thing she'd offered me, and we both knew it. What I didn't know was that Graham Callahan already knew exactly who I was and had been waiting for Beatrice's suspicion to ripen, because suspicion of me was the best cover a guilty man could buy. The trap came 11 days later, and I'll give it this much. It was elegant. A courier delivered a package to my office. Misdirected, the label said, "A case file meant for a law firm 2 floors up. Standard procedure is to log it and reroute it." My assistant logged it. Inside, visible when she checked the contents against the manifest, as procedure required, were internal Meridian documents, not public filings. Internal receiving records. The very records I had once told a man at a bar I needed, stamped with watermarks that made them plainly confidential. By close of business, Meridian's security office had a report of a breach. By morning, there was a formal complaint. A consumer rights investigator had obtained confidential documents through unauthorized access. Graham himself, polished and regretful and just a little too prepared, had already briefed 3 family members. "You see what she is," was the shape of it. The texts were the approach. "Now she's stealing files." It was a beautiful frame, and it died of one small detail, the way these things always do, the watermark. The documents carried Meridian's current confidentiality stamp, but the manifest inside the package, the sheet listing what the law firm had supposedly requested, referenced the records by an index code, and I knew that code because I had spent 6 weeks in Meridian's public filings, and it belonged to the old indexing system, the one Meridian retired 3 years earlier when it changed records vendors. Whoever built that package had assembled the cover story from archived paperwork and fresh stamped documents. A law firm requesting records would use the current index. Only someone pulling from old internal files that predated the switch, would reach for the retired code. Old internal files are not public. You can't get them at a courthouse. You get them one way, from inside. Nora and I laid it out in a memo. 4 pages, dates, codes, the watermark analysis, the courier's manifest, and she sent it through proper channels, addressed to whoever in that family actually read their own mail. Maddox read it. I know because he told me what he did in the hour after. He didn't call his lawyers. He walked to the records room and asked, in his quiet voice, for the access logs on the archived index files. The logs showed one executive pulling those exact series 3 weeks earlier. The executive was his cousin Graham, the man the family had voted to protect. In the dining room next door, on the same night my wrong number text lit up his phone. The family meeting that followed was not quiet, and I wasn't there, so I'll tell it as it was told to me. Beatrice brought the memo. Maddox brought the logs. And Graham, faced with both, did what cornered men do. He wrapped himself in the family. This outsider woman had poisoned Maddox's judgment. The whole thing was her construction, her scheme, and wasn't it convenient that every thread led away from her and toward his own blood? That was when Beatrice Callahan, who had accused me to my face 11 days earlier, said the sentence I never expected from her. I offered her the chance to defend herself with emotion, and she gave me evidence instead. In 50 years, Graham, the guilty ones have always done the opposite. She looked at her brother. She documented the sequence. It's your cousin who never documented anything. And there it was, laid out in the dining room where all of it began. The same irregularities Maddox had chased for 6 months. The same vote that kept Graham in his seat. And now proof that the hand annotating Julian's drafts, the hand that fed him the timing of every shipment, the architect of the entire arrangement, belonged to the cousin at the family table. Graham hadn't just protected a fraud. He'd built it, with Julian as his contractor and my forged name as the paint. Maddox told me he wasn't angry in that room. Angry, he said, would have been a relief. His family had raised him on the principle that blood is the last line of defense, that whatever else you do, you close ranks. He had called that vote himself on that principle. And now the principal was asking him to shield a man who had used the family's clean company as a liability dump and to destroy as a bonus the one person in his life who had never asked him for anything. He stood up and said, "We vote again." They voted. It was not unanimous, but Beatrice voted first, and after her the room followed the way rooms follow the person who has admitted being wrong slowly, then all at once. Graham was removed from every company, every account, every key, that night. What the family did with him after is not my story, and I'll leave it behind their closed doors. But the paper he and Julian built did not stay hidden. Through counsel, and counsel's counsel, and the slow, impersonal machinery that turns private rot into public consequence, the liabilities came home. The retail chain got its settlement. The contaminated shipment got its owner. And Julian Cross discovered that the get-out-of-jail file he'd kept so carefully was a great deal less comforting once the people named in it had made their arrangements. I learned all this in pieces over weeks. What brought it to me directly was an envelope, hand-delivered to Nora's office, no return address, heavy cream paper. Inside, a single sheet, in a handwriting I recognized from months of texts without knowing I recognized it. It said, "You were right. What I didn't tell you was mine to answer for." The delegation letters reached my auditors in March. I knew by April who your ex was. Every evening after that, I chose the conversation over the truth and told myself I was protecting you when I was protecting the 1 hour of my day that wasn't a negotiation. I am not asking you to reply. I am asking you to know that the rules I made were cowardice, not calculation, and that you were never an investigation. You were the only honest thing in the room. And at the bottom, if you were brave enough to send that message, you're brave enough to decide what happens now. I'll be at the Concordian mezzanine on Thursday at 7. If you don't come, I'll understand and I'll stop. It was the first time he'd ever asked me for anything. I went on Thursday. I told myself it was to close the file. Nora, who knew me better, said nothing at all and lent me her good coat. He was on the mezzanine, at 7, standing almost exactly where Julian had stood the night everything began, which I chose to believe was a coincidence, because the alternative was that the man had a flair for staging. He looked older than his photograph and more tired, and when he saw me, he didn't move toward me. He waited. Every man in my life had always closed. the distance. He was the first who left it to me. You came, he said. Don't make it mean more than it does. I came because I have questions and you owe me answers. I do, he said. Ask. So I asked, all of it, standing in the hotel where I'd watched my old life end. When he knew why, he stayed silent, whether any single evening had been about the case. And he answered, without one flicker of the polish every powerful person I'd ever questioned had hidden behind. The vote, the study, the auditor's report, the 10 days he spent deciding whether I was an approach, the exact moment he stopped being a watcher. You told me about the teacher and the $40, he said, and I understood you were exactly what you appeared to be, and I was no longer. You asked me once if I was a dentist. I should have told you then. It would have cost me the conversation. I wasn't willing to pay. That's the whole confession. I let the silence stand. Then I said the thing I'd come to say. I don't forgive the silence. I might, eventually. What I won't do is become a woman in your world who got there. By text message, I've heard what your family thinks I am. Beatrice said it too, my face. Beatrice voted first, he said quietly, to remove Graham. She used your memo. She said it was the only honest document she'd been handed all year. That surprised me more than anything he'd said yet, which brings me to why I asked you here, beyond owing you the truth. Meridian is rebuilding its compliance division from the ground up. I want you to run it. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You want to. Hand the woman your family called an opportunist a job inside the company so she can prove them right? No. I didn't spend 3 months dragging your supplier's fraud into daylight to end up as the girlfriend with an office. He didn't argue. He nodded, like a man whose test I'd just passed. Then I'll change the offer. Not beside. Me, independent. Your own division, your own budget authority in writing, reporting to the board, not to me with the explicit power to audit anything, including my decisions. You'd be the person who checks. It's what you've done your whole life. The only difference is the scale of the paper. And us, I said, because there is no version of this where I take that job as a thank you gift. There is no us yet, he said. There's a wrong number, a man who answered it badly and then well, and a woman deciding whether to let him earn it back. The job stands whether you ever speak to me again. I'd prefer you spoke to me. But the offer is the offer. Then he said the thing that decided me, though I didn't tell him so for weeks. I am done protecting people from the truth, Tessa, starting with you. That's the only promise I'm asking you to test. I took the job. I negotiated it for 3 weeks through my own counsel, not his, and made them write the independence clause twice. Beatrice signed the board resolution without a word to me then, 6 months later, invited me to Sunday dinner and spent the entire meal pretending she hadn't. The rest happened slowly, which is to say honestly. He never once asked me to take his word for anything. He showed me the file instead, every time, and there is no greater love letter from a man like that. I learned that the most powerful man I'd ever met had been raised to believe withholding was a form of love, and I watched him unlearn it, one difficult, unguarded sentence at a time. And he learned I would never need rescuing, only honesty, which he said was the harder discipline, and practiced anyway. A year to the night after I typed the angriest, truest paragraph of my life into a cracked phone, I was standing in my kitchen, my floor, my cabinets, and I picked up my phone and sent a message to a number that was no longer wrong at all. It said, wrong number. His reply came in under a minute. It always did. It said, best mistake I ever received. People ask me sometimes whether I believe in fate. I don't. I believe in a woman who finally checked what mattered, and a man who learned the truth is the only thing worth keeping. But I'll admit this much. I sent a breakup text to the wrong number, and it ended the wrong relationship, exposed the wrong man, and dismantled the wrong empire one forged signature at a time. I never expected the Mafia Boss to reply, but he did. And for the first time in my life, the wrong thing turned out to be exactly right.